There are certainly different rules that can be used when adding integers, and we will get to those shortly. But let me start off by just adding integers using a number line. I want to start by doing the very easy problem of 3 plus 2 on a number line. So in order to do this particular problem, the very first number that I have is 3. So I'm going to put my finger on 3. I am adding here a positive number. Now it's because this is a positive number, it's a positive 2. I don't have that indicated because it's an understood positive 2. But because it's a positive number, I'm going to move in the positive direction 2 places, and I'm going to end up with 5. So obviously we all know the answer to 3 plus 2 is equal to 5, but I wanted to show it on a number line. So let's talk about adding 2 negative numbers on a number line. The idea works exactly the same. I have negative 3, so I'm going to put my finger on negative 3, and because it says I'm adding a negative number, I'm going to move in the negative direction 2 places, which means I'm going to get an answer of negative 5. Remember, when adding positive negative numbers, it is the sign of the second number, in this case a negative, that tells you which direction you need to travel on the number line. In this example, I have a positive number and a negative number, but it works exactly the same way. Once again, I'm going to put my finger on the very first number. The very first number is 5. The second number is a negative 6. So I'm going to move in a negative direction 6 spots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I end up with an answer of negative 1. In the example negative 4 plus 7, I'll do exactly the same thing. I'll put my finger on negative 4, and there's an understood positive sign in front of that 7, which means I'm going to move in a positive direction 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which means I'm going to end up with 3. I could say positive 3, or I could just say 3 for the answer. But let's get away from using a number line and talk about 2 different rules that can be used for adding integers. The first rule is this. If the signs are the same, add the absolute values and use the same sign. Let's say, for instance, you were given negative 8 plus negative 4. The signs are the same. In this particular case, the signs are both negative. So I am just going to know what the absolute values of these numbers are. The absolute value of negative 8 is 8. The absolute value of 4 is 4. I'm going to add those 2 numbers together. I get 12, and I'm going to use the same sign that is present in both of those numbers, so my answer is a negative 12. Here's another example. Negative 323 plus negative 117. The absolute value of negative 323 is 323, and the absolute value of negative 117 is 117. If I add those 2 numbers together, I get 440, but I do need the negative sign because the signs are both the same. They're both negative, so the answer to this is a negative 440. The second rule for adding integers is, if the signs are different, find the difference of the absolute values and use the sign of the greater absolute value. For instance, if you were given negative 20 plus 6, and that's understood to be a positive 6. According to this rule, I'm going to find the difference of the absolute values. So, the absolute value of negative 20 is 20. The absolute value of 6 is 6. Finding the difference means I'm actually going to subtract them. So I get 14. And I want to use the sign of the greater absolute value. Well, this is the greater absolute value, and this had the negative sign attached to it. So the answer to this is a negative 14. Here's another example. if you were given 16 plus a negative 7. The signs are different, so I'm going to go through and know what the absolute value is. The absolute value of 16 is 16. The absolute value of negative 7 is 7. I'm going to take the difference of these two numbers. The difference of these two numbers is 9, and I want the sign of the larger absolute value. This is the larger absolute value, and this had a positive sign. Even though it wasn't there, there was an understood positive sign. So the answer to this is a positive 9. Let me do one more example, this one being with some bigger numbers. If I had negative 515 plus 635, the absolute value of negative 515 is just 515. The absolute value of 635 is 635. Since the signs are different, I have to figure out the difference of these two numbers. So the difference of these two numbers, I'm just going to go 635 minus 515, and I get 120 being the difference of those two numbers. And now I'm going to take a look and see which one has the higher absolute value, the positive or the negative. This is the absolute value with the higher number, and there is an understood positive sign here, so I know that my answer is a positive 120. Now, you may very well be able to do these types of problems without applying the rules. For some people, it just makes sense what the correct answer is as they go through and do this. And certainly if that works for you, that's fine. But a number of people do ask for some specific rules that they can use, and certainly those rules will work all the time. But before we go on to subtraction, I'd just like you to go through and do these three problems, please. So if you just pause this and start back up again, you can check the answers when you are done. Okay, hopefully you've had time to go through and do these three problems. I'm just going to give you the answers. Negative 7 plus negative 8, you should have gotten an answer of negative 15. Negative 14 plus 19, you should have gotten an answer of 5, or you could put a positive 5. 10 plus negative 17, you should have gotten an answer of negative 7. If those are the three answers that you got for these three, that is fantastic. I think you're ready to go on to subtraction. If for some reason you did not, it would be good to probably rewind this and review the rules again for adding integers. To subtract integers, I first of all want to use a number line again. Now, of course, we all know 5 minus 4 is equal to 1. That's not the point here. I just want to talk about using a number line in order to do this. In this particular problem, I have two positive numbers that I am subtracting. A positive 5 subtract a positive 4. So just like with addition, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger on that positive 5. The second sign is a positive, which would seem to indicate that I would be going in a positive direction. But since I am subtracting, I'm going to do the opposite of whatever this particular sign is. And instead of going in a positive direction, I'm going to go in a negative direction 4 places. So I am going to get that answer of 1. We are going to do exactly the same thing when we have this problem, negative 7 subtract negative 2. I have a negative number, so I'm going to put my finger on negative 7. The second number is also negative, which would seem to indicate again that I'm going to be going in the negative direction. But because I am subtracting, I'm going to do the opposite of whatever that sign is. So instead of going in a negative direction, I'm going to go in the positive direction 2 places, and I'm going to end up with an answer of negative 5. So negative 7 subtract negative 2 is actually equal to negative 5. Let me do one more example on a number line before we talk about doing it without a number line. If I was given the problem negative 7 subtract 3, the very first number is a negative 7, so I would put my finger on negative 7. The second number that I have is a positive 3. It says subtract 3, but I'm subtracting a positive 3. And since I'm subtracting, I'm going to do the opposite of moving in a positive direction. I'm going to be moving in a negative direction, 3. So I'm going to end up at negative 10. So the answer to this is a negative 10. So negative 7 subtract 3 more is equal to a negative 10. Being able to subtract integers is a very important part of this course, and it is also the area where many people make the most mistakes. There are certainly rules that we can discuss again for subtracting integers, but over the years I have found that what works best for most people is to change a subtraction problem to an addition problem and use the same rules we had before. Let me show you what I mean. So let's say, for instance, that you just have 5 subtract 2. Now, obviously, everyone knows that the answer is 3, but I want to talk about this problem with what I was just talking about. If I have 5 subtract 2, 5 subtract 2 is exactly the same thing as 5 and adding a negative 2. If I take 2 away, it is exactly the same thing as adding that negative 2. And that is a very important part of this, and you need to make sure that you understand that these are exactly the same thing. Now, obviously, we had said 5 subtract 2 is equal to 3. We know that. But if I did change this to 5 add a negative 2, now I could just use those same 2 rules that I had for addition. And in this particular case, one of them is positive. This is a positive 5. The other one is a negative. So since I have numbers that have different signs, I am going to take the absolute value of them. I'm going to take the difference of them, which is 3, and I am going to take the sign of the larger absolute value, so I do get that answer of 3. Now, I certainly would not be going through all that work to do a problem like this. Once again, I'm just trying to illustrate how this works with a little bit easier problem. So let's do the same thing with negative 7 subtract 3. Rather than subtracting, I'm going to change this to an addition problem. And rather than subtracting 3, I'm going to add a negative 3, because adding the opposite of what I have is exactly the same thing as subtracting. Now I can use those rules. I am adding 2 different integers that have the same sign, so the absolute value of both of them is 7 and 3. And since they have the same sign, I'm going to use that same sign. I get an answer of negative 10. Here's a third example. 8 subtract negative 1. Rather than doing this as a subtraction problem, I'm instead going to change this to an addition problem. So I have 8. I'm going to change this to addition. And I'm going to take the opposite of this particular number. Instead of negative 1, it's going to be equal to 1. So 8 plus 1 is equal to 9, which means that 8 subtract a negative 1 is also equal to 9. How about negative 5 subtract negative 2? If I wanted to change this to an addition problem, the very first number, negative 5, is going to stay the same. I'm going to change it to addition. In order to change it to addition, I have to change the sign of the second number. So I'm going to have negative 5 plus a positive 2, which I could just write as 2. Now I'm going to use those rules for addition. The numbers that I have different signs. One's positive, one's negative. So the difference between those two numbers is 3. And the number with the higher absolute value is that negative 5. So the answer to this is a negative 3. So negative 5 subtract negative 2 is equal to 3. In real life, it's not often that we subtract with negative numbers. But let me give you an example of something that could happen. At the end of the month, you get a statement from your bank that says you have $522 in an account. However, at one point they charged you $20, and you don't think that is right. You call the bank and successfully argue that the $20 debit should be taken away. What is your new balance? If you were to write that in a mathematical equation, we started, you have $522. And you want them to take away that negative $20 that they charged you. Well, in order to do that, if they took that away, they're actually going to add $20 more to your account. So you're going to end up with $542. So if we do that problem by changing this to addition, we're going to change it to addition and we're going to add the opposite of that negative 20. That shows that the 522 plus the 20 would give that new balance of $542. As I said earlier, addition and subtraction of integers is very important in this course. Before going on to the next video in this module, I would like you to complete the quick check on this video, which can be found next. In it, you will find 5 quick problems that can be used to check your understanding. If you do well in the quick check, you are ready to watch the next video. If you have difficulty or just want to do some more review problems, there are additional review problem worksheets available for you to do. As always, you can also contact me directly and I can answer any questions you may have.